Hello, this is part 4 of the article presentation of Improving Students' Learning with Effective Learning Techniques, Promising Directions from Cognitive and Educational Psychology. This part of the presentation is being done by Jesse Johnson. Material that is going to be learned is often encountered more than once, such as when students review notes and then make note cards to restudy the material for a test. Cramming is a very popular strategy for students. Now, while cramming is better than not studying at all, wouldn't it be more beneficial to students if they spread out the study of the content over a period of time? Studies point to yes. Studying content over a period of time points to a learning technique called the distributed practice effect. The distributed practice effect refers to the finding that distributing learning over time, either within a single study session or across sessions, typically benefits long-term retention more than does mass learning opportunities back-to-back or in relatively close succession. There is a lot of research done on distributed practice and extensive review articles, which will provide the foundation for the review of distributed practice in this article. Distributed practice in this presentation will encompass both spacing effects, referring to the advantage of spaced over missed practice, and lag effects, referring to the advantage of spacing with longer lags over spacing with shorter lags. So, what does distributed practice look like? We will look at an experiment on distributed practice conducted by Barak in 1979. In this experiment, students learned translations of Spanish words to criterion in an original session. After that, students were asked to participate in 6 additional sessions in order to get a chance to retrieve and relearn the translations. The students were separated into 3 different conditions. The first condition, a zero spacing condition, had students participate in 6 back-to-back rapid learning sessions. In the one-day condition, students participated in learning sessions spaced 1 day apart. The last condition, the 30-day condition, had students participate in learning sessions spaced 30 days apart. The different conditions were compared during the learning sessions. The one-day condition resulted in slightly more forgetting across sessions than the 0-day condition, which meant that they scored lower on the initial tests at the beginning of each session. However, they still obtained almost perfect accuracy by the 6th session. During the 30-day condition, forgetting was much greater across sessions, and the initial test performances were not on the same level as the other 2 conditions, even by the 6th session. However, those who were in the 30-day condition showed the best retention of the translations on the final test. So, the condition with the most inter-session forgetting yielded the greatest long-term retention. Why does distributed practice work? There are a few theories that have been proposed and tested. One theory involves the idea of deficient processing, which states that when the second learning opportunity occurs close in time to the first learning opportunity, processing of material suffers. The idea is that students may be misled to think that they know more than they actually do if they reread or retrieve material within a close time frame of their first learning opportunity. Information is easy to retrieve when it has been processed recently, which can make students think that they know the material when in actuality they just remember it because it was learned recently. Another theory involves the idea of reminding. Reminding is when material to be learned is presented a second time and serves to remind the learner of the first learning opportunity. This leads to the retrieval of the material, which enhances memory. The last theory to be discussed is the theory of consolidation. This theory poses the idea that the second learning episode benefits from any consolidation of the first trace that has already happened. Distributed practice doesn't refer to a specific kind of learning session, but rather a particular schedule of learning sessions. This means that better learning occurs when learning sessions are spread out in time rather than if they occur within a close proximity of each other. One of the main questions about distributed practice is how should learning sessions be spaced? As discussed earlier, Barak's study showed a larger distributed practice effect over 30 days than just 1 day. Sapita and colleagues in 2006 stated that every study examined here with a retention interval longer than 1 month demonstrated a benefit from distribution of learning across weeks or months. Even with this information, it seems that the answer isn't as simple as longer lags are better. The answer depends on how long the learner wants to retain the information. Cepeda and colleagues did a study that yielded results about this. Criterion performance seemed to be best when the lag between sessions was about 10 to 20% of the desired retention interval. So, if someone wants to remember something for a week, learning episodes should be spaced 12 to 24 hours apart. If they want to remember something for 5 years, learning episodes should be spaced 6 to 12 months apart. Most studies done on distributed practice have involved undergraduate students. However, effects have been seen in other specific populations, such as those with traumatic brain injuries, multiple sclerosis, and those with amnesia. In general, children of all ages have benefited from distributed practice in studies. On the other end of the spectrum, older adults seem to have benefited from distributed practice in studies as well. It seems that learners of different ages have benefited from distributed practice, but there is debate as to how much the distributed practice effect may be modified by individual characteristics of learners, such as prior knowledge and motivation. Distributed practice effects have been observed with many types of materials that are to be learned, including definitions, face name pairs, translations of foreign vocabulary words, trivia facts, text, lectures, and pictures. Distributed practice has yielded improved performance in a range of domains, including biology, advertising, mathematics, history, music, and even surgery. Distributed practice hasn't proven to be beneficial with certain tasks. Effects are smaller and sometimes non-existent for tasks that are very complex, such as airplane control. Much research has established the durability of distributed practice over time, but less attention has been devoted to other kinds of criterion used in educational contexts. The meta-analysis done by Cepeda and colleagues in 2009 focused on studies in which the dependent measure was verbal free recall. It showed that the distributed practice effect generalized to dependent measures beyond free recall, such as things like multiple choice questions, cued recall and short answer questions, frequency judgments, and sometimes implicit memory. However, distributed practice effects may not necessarily generalize to all other educationally relevant measures. Most of the classroom studies that have demonstrated distributed practice effects have involved spacing of more than just one opportunity. Real classrooms use a variety of techniques, so studies have looked into the ability of using distributed practice in situations where multiple techniques are used. Sobel, Cepeda, and Kapler did a study where fifth graders learned vocabulary words. Each learning session had multiple steps, such as the teacher reads and defines the words, and the student writes down the words and definitions and creates sentences with them. The criterion test was given to the students 5 weeks after the second learning session. Students successfully defined a greater portion of GRE vocabulary words learned in sessions spaced a week apart, as opposed to words learned in sessions spaced a minute apart. A study done by Boudet, Embos, Vandeville, and Berger in 2011 looked at college students who took a statistics course over a 6-month period versus those who took it over an 8-week period. A variety of study and retrieval activities were more spaced out in the 6-month period than in the 8-week period. Students in the 6-month course outperformed students in the 8-week course on an open-ended test assessing conceptual understanding, as well as on the final exam. Issues may arise when it comes to implementing distributed practice techniques into the classroom. Dempster and Ferris in 1990 argued that the way that most textbooks are laid out do not encourage distributed learning. They lump related material together and don't review previously discussed material from past units. This shows that study materials for students may not be set up in a way that encourages distributed practice. Another issue is how students naturally study. In 1991, Michael discussed the procrastination scallop, which is the student's typical study pattern. The student spends more time studying as the exam date approaches. This pattern of studying was confirmed by Mawhinney and colleagues in a study done in 1971. The results of the study showed that when there was less frequent testing, students did more studying immediately before the test. When there was daily testing, students' studying was distributed over time. There are mixed results on the issue of whether students understand the benefits of distributed practice. Students typically chose to mask their studies under some conditions, then chose to space their study of items. Some studies have shown that students rate learning levels higher after math study than space study, even after experiencing the benefits of spacing, such as in a study done by Cornell and Bjork in 2008. Based on available evidence, the writers of the article rated distributed practice as having high utility. It works across students of different ages, with a wide variety of materials, with the majority of standard lab procedures, and over long delays. It is easy to implement and has been used successfully in many classroom studies, although it may require some training. Although less research has been done on how distributed practice affects use complex materials, existing studies suggest that it should be successful with complex materials as well. In every kind of class and at every grade level, students are expected to learn material for many different topics and problems of many different kinds. Because the goal is to learn all of the material, how should the student schedule their studying of the different materials? Most students would use an approach called blocking, where they study all the content for one topic or all the problems of one kind before moving on to the next material. In contrast, recent research has explored interleaved practice, where learners alternate their practice of different kinds of items and problems. In contrast to other techniques discussed in this presentation, many fewer studies have looked at the benefits of interleaved practice on measures relevant to student achievement. It was chosen anyway because there is plenty of evidence indicating that interleaving can improve motor learning under some conditions, and growing literature on interleaving and performance on cognitive tasks is demonstrating the same kind of promise. So, what does interleaved practice look like? Rohrer and Taylor conducted a study in 2007 where college students had to compute the volumes of 4 different geometric solids. They had 2 practice sessions, separated by 1 week, followed by a criterion test a week after the second practice session. The students were separated into 2 groups. During practice sessions, the blocking group would go over the tutorial and practice problems for one type of solid, then move on to the tutorial and practice problems for another solid, and so on. The interleaved group would first go over tutorials for all 4 geometric solids first, then do practice problems for all of the geometric solids after that. The results were that, during practice, those in the blocking group performed better than those in the interleaved group. However, on the criterion test, those in the interleaved group did much better than those in the blocking group, as the interleaved practice boosted accuracy by 43%. Why does interleaved practice work? There are a few theories that have been proposed. One theory is that interleaved practice promotes organizational processing and item-specific processing, which allows the student to more readily compare different types of problems. Another theory is based on the distributed retrieval of information from long-term memory. In blocked practice, the information needed to solve a problem is in the working memory, and learners don't have to retrieve the solution. On the other hand, during interleaved practice, learners must retrieve information for a new type of problem from long-term memory. This delayed practice testing is said to boost memory for the retrieved information. Interleaved practice represents a learning condition, and it naturally co-varies with distributed practice, the techniques discussed earlier. So, some of the benefits of interleaved practice may reflect the benefits of distributed practice. However, results of some studies have suggested that spacing involved in distributed practice is not responsible for interleaving effects. The discriminative contrast hypothesis indicates that interleaved practice may further enhance a student's ability to develop accurate concepts when exemplars of different concepts are presented simultaneously. The degree to which interleaving tasks enhances performance depends on the amount of instruction and practice that students initially receive when the task is presented. What does this mean for students with lower skill levels or students solving more complex tasks? They should receive more training. Most studies done on interleaved practice have been conducted on college-age students. Across these studies, there were mixed results about whether interleaved practice boosted performance or not. Differences in effectiveness of interleaved practice in college-age students may be more relevant to the kind of task employed or the dosage of practice. There are mixed reports of whether interleaved practice is effective with younger students. Taylor and Rohrer reported in 2010 that 4th graders benefited from interleaved practice when learning how to solve math problems. During the same year, Rao and colleagues found that interleaved practice did not boost performance in 5th and 6th graders in learning how to do fractions. Olina and colleagues in 2006 conducted a study with high school students and interleaving practices to help them learn about comma usage. Results showed that higher skill students were hurt by interleaving, and that interleaving didn't help lower skill students. Interleaved practice effects have been explored using very simple to very complex cognitive tasks and materials, and the outcomes are mixed. A study by Schneider, Healy, and Bourne had college students learn French vocabulary words, and correct recall was about the same for both the blocked practice and interleaved practice groups. They did another similar study, and although interleaved practice led to a slightly better rate, it seems that interleaved practice of vocabulary doesn't increase retention. There have been more promising results in studies that have used interleaving to help students learn mathematics. In 2 studies done by Carlson and colleagues, interleaved practice improved students' speed in solving Boolean problems. A study done by Mayfield and Chase in 2002 showed that interleaving increased students' ability to solve new algebraic problems. Finally, interleaving has been shown to improve formation of concepts in certain areas, such as artists' painting styles and bird classification. Although it boosts formation of concepts in certain areas, research by Goldstone in 1996 suggests that interleaving won't always be better. Situations where it wouldn't be better are those where exemplars within a category are dissimilar, or when blocking may be superior. Several studies have used procedures for instruction that could be used in the classroom. One major study was done by Mayfield and Chase. College students with poor math skills were taught algebra rules across 25 sessions. The blocking group reviewed the rule learned in the immediately previous session only. The interleaving group reviewed the rule learned in the previous session, along with rules from earlier sessions. The results were that on the final test, performance on both application and problem-solving items were substantially better for the interleaved group. As each new type of problem is introduced, practice should be interleaved with practice problems from other sessions that students will be expected to discriminate between. By looking at studies done on interleaved practice, it seems that in order for interleaving to be successful, after a given kind of problem or topic is introduced, practice should first focus on that particular problem. After another problem or topic is introduced, that problem should first be practiced, but then should be followed by interleaving the current problem with ones from previous sessions. Interleaved practice may take more time to use than blocked practice because solution times often slow during interleaved practice. Still, the slowing indicates the recruitment of other processes that actually boost performance. Based on available evidence, the writers of the article rated interleaved practice as having moderate utility. Positive characteristics include that it has been shown to have relatively dramatic effects on students' learning and retention of mathematical skills, and that it helps other kinds of cognitive skills. The biggest negative characteristic is that the literature on this practice is currently small, and it contains enough null effects to raise concern about effectiveness. However, given the promise of interleaved practice for improving student achievement, there is a great need for research that will evaluate how the benefits are moderated by factors such as the dosage of practice, student abilities, and material difficulty. The main goal of this article was to provide extensive reviews of different learning techniques for others to judge their usability for his or her own instructional or learning goals. To obtain this goal, the article indicated whether sufficient evidence was available to support conclusions about the generalizability of a technique, issues for its implementation, or its efficacy in educational contexts. If sufficient evidence did exist, the article also indicated whether the technique actually worked. We've provided a replica of Table 4 from the article for the viewer's information. It may be useful if the viewer is interested in seeing a quick overview of what techniques may work best. A P indicates a positive rating, meaning that the authors found enough evidence to conclude that this technique benefits student performance for a particular category or issue. An N is a negative rating, which means that the available evidence shows that the learning technique does not benefit performance for a particular category or issue. A Q indicates a qualified rating, meaning that both positive and negative evidence has been reported with respect to a particular issue. An I indicates an insufficient rating, meaning that insufficient evidence is available to draw conclusions about the effects of a technique in a certain category or issue. Some cells have more than one rating. This indicates that there is enough evidence to evaluate the technique on one dimension of a category or issue, but insufficient evidence is available for other dimensions. It is hoped that this article provided evidence-based recommendations for teachers and students about how useful various learning techniques actually are. There are two possible directions for future research that could have immediate implications for education. The first direction would be more research to fully explore the degree to which the benefits of some techniques generalize. The second direction would be to more fully explore the benefits of most of the techniques in realistic, representative educational settings. Conducting these types of research are crucial if educational changes that will have a good likelihood of actually improving student learning and achievement are to be recommended. Presley, Goodchild, and colleagues noted that many students are committed to ineffective strategies. Hopefully, reviews such as this one will have a positive impact and will help foster further scientific evaluation of learning techniques. Surveys have shown that students are the most committed to highlighting and rereading techniques, which are both strategies that have low utility. However, some students have reported using practice testing, and they've benefited from its use. The results of a study done by Goering showed that the frequency of students reported use of practice testing was significantly correlated with their performance on the final exam. The real question is, why don't students consistently use effective learning techniques? One possibility may be that students aren't taught which techniques are effective or how to use them effectively in school. This may be happening because teachers themselves don't know about the efficacy of different learning techniques, and because most learning techniques don't get adequate coverage in educational psychology textbooks. Because of this, teachers aren't likely to get a sufficient introduction to which techniques actually work, which means they cannot train students on how to use them. Another reason why students may not consistently use effective learning techniques is that teachers put most of their focus on teaching students content and critical thinking skills, leaving less time for them to teach students how to develop effective learning techniques. A major concern is that while students may do well in early grades because their learning is largely supervised, they may struggle later when they are responsible for their own learning. What are some possible ways to solve this problem? One way is to train students in the classroom on how to use effective learning techniques. It would not take that much time away from teaching content and would be beneficial in the long run if techniques are consistently taught across multiple content areas. Another way to solve this problem is for teachers to incorporate learning techniques into their lesson plans. It is obvious that many students are not using effective learning techniques, but could use the more effective techniques without much effort, so teachers should be encouraged to more consistently and explicitly train students to use learning techniques as they are engaged in pursuing various instructional and learning goals. Here is the reference for our article, as you can see. Thank you so much for listening.